Okay, folks, for all those who'd like to participate in the meeting, if you could get seat on down here, I'll get all the introductions done and set up the meeting format, okay? Okay, good evening and welcome. My name is Tim Brown. I'm the Mayor Pro Tem of the City of San Clemente. This is an unusual meeting tonight. It's a little bit informal by its nature. I'm sorry to be sitting up here, but this is the other microphone. So Dr. Driscoll has one, so I'm going to be up here because this is the microphone is. Just to establish the meeting format, first of all, I'd like to, I'll do some introductions in a second here. We've got Dr. Driscoll with us, and we've got the benefit of being able to learn a little bit about the earthquake, the hazards for Southern California, as the title is here. What we've got is a 45-minute presentation that will be conducted by Dr. Driscoll with a slideshow that's going to be presented up here, and this meeting is being recorded. It's not being broadcast, but it is being recorded for the benefit of those who weren't able to come tonight but are still wishing to know more about the risks and the hazards we face, particularly related to seismic issues in Southern California. What this meeting tonight is the benefit of the residents, South Orange County and San Clemente specifically, to learn more about these issues. What this is not is going to be related particularly to the San Onofre seismic risks. So that was covered extensively during the CEP meetings, and will obviously there's some correlation, there's some ties there, but ultimately it's very specific to risks that present us as a city. And so it's going to be focused mainly on that. I'll let Dr. Driscoll navigate that. What we are going to be doing, though, is we have a 45-minute presentation, and after the presentation, we're going to have 15 minutes of Q&A, depending on how much time that allows, how many questions we have. We don't, for the meeting tonight, what we're going to be using are these blue cards. Now, there's a whole portion of this where it has a speaker card on the front. You can just simply write on the back a question. You don't even have to leave your name. Just write a question on the back, and then I will be presenting those questions to Dr. Driscoll at the end of it, and be able to answer as many of them as we can with the time that we've been allowed. And so I have one here by Sherry Krummer. If you'd like to write a question or redo one with a question, I'd be happy to do that. And then we'll go with that if that's correct. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Dr. Driscoll, and he will do any introductions here and take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Brown. Thank you all for coming. My name is Neil Driscoll. I'm a professor of geology and geophysics at the University of California, San Diego. So here, the team that we put together to study these hazards in Southern California are second to none. We have colleagues from UNR, so Graham Kent from the University of Nevada, Reno, the Seismological Lab. He's the state seismologist for Nevada. He also worked at Scripps for many years, expert on geophysical data and seismology. Steve Wisnowski developed many of the models we're going to talk about today with stepovers, so the distance between faults and how fault rupture can jump from one fault to another. Steve Wisnowski is a world leader. We have Alistair Harding, who's a geophysicist, one of the leaders in processing and interpreting seismic data. So this team are from universities across the West and make up some of the brightest minds looking at seismology and geophysics. So here, I'm going to just provide a little outline, and then I'm going to provide an executive summary of what the results are from our research. So if you want to get home early, you can leave at that point. If you want to stay and look at the data that these conclusions are based on, we'll go through them in detail. And as the Mayor Pro Tem said, we will then take questions at the end of this. So here, there's been a few models that have been proposed to understand the offshore geology, the relief, the shoals and the deeps. And we'll talk about this. And one of them is this hypothesized oceanside blind thrust. And this is a thrust fault that has been proposed to explain the offshore observations. We'll also talk about strike-slip models that are also put forth to explain the same observations. So we have these two contrasting models, and they have implications for the seismic hazards offshore. Then we'll go into the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon Fault and the characterization of this fault and how we've characterized this at an unprecedented scale, both in distribution of seismic data and in nested data, data that images the top 50 meters and data that image the top 5 kilometers. We'll then jump and talk about near and far field tsunami hazards for the inner California borderlands, which we live alongside. Okay? So what are the hazards from tsunamis here? And then finally, we're going to look at fire hazards. So we've just developed a new state-of-the-art early detection fire system. And one of our cameras actually overlooks San Clemente. And we're going to be building out next in Orange County. So we'll look at that, and you can all jump on the website and look at some of the data. Finally, we live in Hazard County. California has hazards. It has nice weather, but when people ask me why I live here, it's not that I can sail in the morning and ski in the afternoon. It's because we're the most progressive state in the world, and we respect difference. That's why I'm proud to be a Californian. But we need to be prepared, not scared, for these hazards. And we don't need to inflate them, because I'm going to inform you tonight that there's significant hazard here. Don't inflate it, but stay within the data. Okay? All right. So there we go. Here's the executive summary for those who want to go home early. Well, it's always good to have an exit point, right? I'll close my eyes, and if you're all gone, then I'll go home too. How long do I close? All right, I'll give you 30 seconds. All right, so here, this is the oceanside blind thrust, and I actually brought a green and red pointer because I thought that the green would not be absorbed on the screen. So I'm going to smudge the screens here for San Clemente and put my fingers on them a little bit. So here, I'm not going to do that. The plane here for the oceanside blind thrust, it shoals to the west. And the model is that it pushes all of this material like snow in front of a snowplow west. And because of its low angle, it's about 23 degrees, it has a huge area in the seismogenic zone. The seismogenic zone is the strong part of the earth that can support stress. And when the stress exceeds the strength of the rock, it ruptures, and that's the earthquake. But here, when we look at the data offshore, it doesn't support the predictions made by the oceanside blind thrust. So our work has actually refuted the existence of this large thrust fault that's underneath our coastline. There's no evidence offshore for this thrust. Okay? This reduces the ground motion here along the coast because of hanging wall effects don't exist. It also reduces tsunamigenic hazard because as I push this snow in front of this plow, I create vertical relief, and I displace the water. And when the water collapses, it forms a wave. And these are the type of margins or thrusts that I'll talk about later that have the large tsunamis. Okay? They're called thrust or subduction style margins. So here, our work shows that offshore, the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon Fault, from La Jolla all the way into the South LA Basin, is divided into segments. But the boundaries between these segments, which we call stepovers, are all 2 kilometers or less. They will not impede rupture on a segment. So our work shows that all of the offshore segments and the onshore segment there in the South LA Basin could rupture in concert. This would generate a 7.3 or 7.4 magnitude earthquake. Let's put that into context. That'll be the 6th or 7th largest earthquake historically in the state of California. This is a significant threat. Okay? It's a significant earthquake. All right? And it's right offshore. Tsunamis. we'll learn tonight that tsunamis have two forms. They have a far-field form from an earthquake happening like in Alaska or in Chile, and then the water moves at airplane speeds through the deep ocean, and it slows down when it approaches the margins, and it builds up amplitude. Okay. But here, offshore California, we have this really irregular relief. If you're a surfer, you know about Cortez Bank, Bishop Rock, where it breaks unbelievably like twice a year. And we have Tanner Bank. So we know we have these shoals offshore. And what happens is the waves come in, they build up, and then they collapse. So these shoals and deeps offshore act as a natural baffle to far-field tsunamis. Near-field tsunamis are generated by slope failure or by fault offset that move fast, or the slope failure slides quickly down the slope. It displaces water. These tsunamis are nearby. You have minutes. If you see the water retreat when you're at the beach, all of these cities here have evacuation routes for tsunamis, blue signs with a white wave. If you see the water recede quickly, seek higher ground. If you feel an earthquake shaking, leave the beach and seek higher ground. And don't return until public officials tell you it's safe. So here, these near-field tsunamis happen within minutes. They're on the order of about 6 to 8 meters, which is a pretty significant wave. The largest historical tsunami wave in California was reported in October 1868 in the San Francisco Bay region, and that was 4.5 meters. Yeah, that's a while. Okay, so this is the Whittier fire. This happened this summer. We just got a fire camera mounted a couple of weeks before this fire. We're looking at this fire with our camera. Early fire detection and situational awareness helps firefighters and first responders to fight fire early and hard. And I'll show you some quotes from the Chief Fennessy from CAL FIRE, who says these cameras are a game changer. So we've developed these. They're on the mountaintops all throughout San Diego County. We're moving north. Orange County is our next neighbor. They have time-lapse. They have machine vision. They have infrared. They're pan, tilt, zoom cameras that can be controlled by the firefighters. Sheriffs get access. Mayors get access. So you can drive the cameras. And it's really good. We have cameras up in the Tahoe region. You can check out the skiing, see new snowfall. Okay, so these cameras are a game changer and help with fire hazard. All right, so here, it's your time to leave. You've got to go. Executive summary's over. So here, let's just talk about large earthquakes. The largest earthquakes occur in subduction zones where one plate is recycled beneath another plate. This is the ring of fire that we see in the Pacific. There's a lot of friction stuffing this plate back down into the earth. It takes a lot of energy, and the plate's strong, and it builds up stress. And when that stress is released, we call it strain or an earthquake. And here, the largest earthquake is the 1960 Chilean earthquake, magnitude 9.5. My goodness, okay? My goodness, all right? Good Friday earthquake, 64, Alaska, 9.2. Okay? These are all subduction-style earthquakes, and they generate vertical motion. And this vertical motion can be tsunamigenic. The Sumatra 2004 Boxing Day, records over 200,000 people died by that consequent tsunami. In the Pacific, because we had the 60 and 64 earthquakes, we actually have a tsunami warning system in the Pacific. They did not have a system in the Indian Ocean. Okay? And then the Tohoku, the 9.0 earthquake in 2011. The tsunami in some areas is reported as high as 40 meters. Okay? This was a shallow earthquake. It ruptured longer than some people thought, but seismologists, myself, colleagues like Graham Kent, when you look back farther in the record, there are events of this magnitude. This was one of the largest earthquakes off Japan. So here, what I want you to take away is subduction margins, large earthquakes, tsunamigenic processes, because there's vertical deflection. We're on a strike-slip margin. Let's look at California. It's a very different. So here, subduction, plates recycled. Strike-slip, plates move by one another. These are the three largest earthquakes in California historically. The Fort Tejon earthquake in 1857, okay, had on the order of about 400-kilometer rupture. That's a big rupture. The 1908 San Francisco earthquake, huge deaths because of fire and infrastructure, hit a highly populated area. Fort Tejon, only a handful of people died because it was 1857, not very populated. But the 1906, up to 480-kilometer rupture. Okay? That's a big rupture. All right? It moved 9 meters on average. Okay? And then there's the Lone Pine, the 1872 earthquake. Notice that all of these earthquakes are below 8. We do not have a magnitude 8 historically in the state of California on the San Andreas. The fault that carries the most amount of displacement, up to 20 millimeters per year. No 8s, okay? No 8s. So here, these earthquakes are smaller because it's strike-slip. It's a different style of deformation. Please keep remembering that as we go through this talk. The large earthquakes are in subduction-style margins, not strike-slip, but don't take a 7.8. I hope to be on my sailboat in the Marquesas retired, okay? This will be an event, all right? 7.4, which we, based on data, we estimate as the largest potential earthquake on the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon, will be a serious, significant event. We care because we live here, okay? And we have much infrastructure on the ocean, okay? High population. When you take LA, San Diego, and our neighbors in Tijuana, we probably have close to the highest coastal population anywhere, okay, in the United States. So here, this has 1.8 billion pixels. This model I'm going to show you is run on a supercomputer that's a collaboration between San Diego State, University of California, San Diego, SCEC Center, the Southern California Earthquake Center. And what I'm going to show you is a fault. This is a simulated 7.7. So in my business, we call this the big one. This is a big earthquake. Ruptures on the order of 230 kilometers. The rupture is shown here by these dots. So we're going to start down here in Bombay Beach, which is, if you've never gone there, it's one of the best tourist places to hang out. And it's going to rupture all the way up to Lancaster. And what I want you to notice is how long the motion continues and the width of the displacement. Okay, so watch how this fault unfolds and the width of the displacement. So here we go. So yellows and whites are not good. That's a lot of displacement. So here, the earthquake's happening. Up in the corner there is the time of the earthquake. We're 30 seconds in. We're still rupturing the rock. The rupturing's continuing. We're at about a minute now. Feels like forever. No more earthquake. Look at the energy propagate northward, like waves in front of a boat. Get ready for LA. It's like a bowl of jelly. Watch this. All right, we're almost 2 minutes into the earthquake. Okay? But what I want you to notice is the ground displacement is centered close to where the earthquake is. Okay, so ground motion is what we feel, magnitude is what we measure. Okay? So here, the simulation shows that also we have directivity. If the fault starts at Bombay Beach and moves north, the populated areas such as Riverside and LA move much more. If the fault starts in Lancaster and moves south, then they move much less. So something we've learned is the directivity, how these earthquakes propagate, is important to the ground motion. So here, these are the faults, Southern California. Starting over to the east, we have the San Andreas Fault that accommodates about half of the displacement. So the Pacific North American plate is about 50 millimeters per year. Imagine you didn't cut your fingernails for a year. That's about how much motion there is. Okay? Kind of terrible thought, but it gives you a relative time frame. So here, the San Jacinto Fault, which is just to the west, is about on the order of about 10 to 18 millimeters per year. And then you have a significant drop to the Elsinore Fault on the order of about 5 or 6. And then the offshore faults are not as well constrained, but the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon comes on shore here in Orange County and in San Diego County, and it's moving on the order of about 0.5 to 2 millimeters per year. So we call this a low slip fault. You'll notice this outline, and here we can go off. This is the Coronado Bank Fault, the San Diego Trough Fault, the San Clemente Fault Zone. And what you'll notice is this yellow box, the Oceanside Blind Thrust. Well, the reason the other faults are more like lines on the map is they're vertical strike-slip faults. Okay? The Oceanside Blind Thrust, as I showed you, is a dipping fault, and therefore has geometry. And look, here we are right here. We're sitting here in San Clemente, and the northern part of this box is right where we are. Okay? This box goes underneath this fault that's dipping, shallow here, deep here, is beneath Southern California coastline. Okay? And this thrust has a large area in the seismogenic zone and creates vertical relief. So it could be tsunamigenic. So the two major faults, because of their proximity, because the ground motion dies away from the fault, the epicenter, depending on the rock type and attenuation. But the faults that are our biggest hazard here on the coastline, the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon Fault and the Oceanside Blind Thrust. Okay? They're closest to us. And just to show you that, here's just in kilometers and miles. I'm used to being in kilometers. When I convert, my satellite crashes into Mars. No. So here, if you look, the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon Fault is about 8 kilometers from the shoreline. And it comes on shore here in Orange County and San Diego County. The hypothesized Oceanside Blind Thrust is 7 kilometers, but it's not 7 kilometers laterally. It's 7 kilometers vertically beneath us here. Okay? I agree. All right, so let's just backstep and just do a little accounting so we're all on the same page as we move forward. So here, a blind thrust looks like this. We have the fault. We have layers offset by the fault. Then we have layers that are folded, but they're not faulted. The reason we call this a blind thrust is the fault doesn't daylight at the surface. So the layers that you can see offset here, okay, that's where the fault is. The fault nose or tip is right there, and the regions get folded above it. So we have what's called fault fold propagation, but the fault doesn't daylight. And if you look at this figure, you'll see the fault's dipping. And so in the other figures, I've mapped on the dip of this plane. So here, this is the plane that you're seeing in cross-section underneath the coast. The hanging wall is here, and the foot wall is here. So when I talk about hanging wall effects, I'm talking about this block. And this terminology is adopted from miners. This is weaker. So when a miner is mining, they dig down the fault, they put their light in the hanging wall, and they walk on the footwall. And that'll help you remember these two names. Okay? They're geometrically related to how miners excavated for gold and other precious metals. Now, the other style of fault is a right lateral fault. And you can see here that if you were standing on this block, looking across the fault, the road is deflected to the right. Independent of reference frame, if you were standing on this block, looking across the fault, the road is deflected to the right. Therefore, it's called a right lateral fault. Blind thrust, we get vertical motion. It can be tsunamigenic. We get hanging wall effects. Strike slip faults, we get less dip slip component or vertical component than we have in these other thrust scenarios. So here, this is the offshore bathymetry that we collected. Catalina is sitting right up here. Okay, I'm getting good exercise, and I better speed it up or I'm not going to get through all this. But this relief offshore is predicted to occur from these two different models, the oceanside blind thrust or the segmented strike slip. So here's the geometry and extent of the hypothesized oceanside blind thrust. The upper panel, I'm showing you a cross-section like a road cut that you'd see on the highway. The bottom panel, I'm showing it in map view where it goes underneath the coast. It's low angle, 23 degrees. So if the seismogenic zone here is 13 kilometers thick, you have much more of this fault in the seismogenic zone than you do a vertical fault. Does that make sense? So a vertical fault would cut through, and the depth to the seismogenic zone would be 13 kilometers because it's vertical. This here, plane, there's much more of this plane in the seismogenic zone because it's dipping at 22 degrees. Bigger area in the seismogenic zone, bigger potential earthquake. So here, the other model, this is mapping we've done. The red are active faults. This is the first active fault map. It's going out for publication. This map shows here the San Diego Trough linking up with the San Pedro Basin all the way up into LA region. This is the longest fault offshore. The other active faults are the Palos Verdes and the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon in red. Our work shows that these other faults are inactive. Okay? And we show how they connect up. Now, if you look at this model up here, this is a right lateral fault. The fault here is moving to the right of this plate. Let's say we have a jog now. We have a jog to the right, segmented fault. This plate's moving this way, this plate's moving this way. I make a hole. Okay? If I go over here and I have a right lateral fault, but I have a left jog, then this plate's going over this plate, and I have compression and uplift, and I form a mountain. Okay? We're going to see this. Okay? So the way you get topography in this model is by jogs and segmented faults. The way you get topography in the other model is faults pushing up from depth and deforming the seafloor. Okay? We all good? All right. So all of these data are available publicly. You can get the bathymetry data here at the USGS site. You can get all of the seismic data at the seismic portal at UTIG. All of these data that go into these results are publicly available. Okay? Both the raw data, the processed data, the interpreted data. And all of these have been published in 3 manuscripts that have been peer-reviewed: Journal of Geophysical Research, Marine Geology, and Applied Geology of California. We spent about 100 days at sea collecting these data. We collected bathymetry, we collected shallow geophysics, we collected deep geophysics. I went back and forth on this margin mowing the lawn for 100 days. I'd wake up and I'd be going this way, and I'd go to bed and I'd be going this way. Back and forth. So imagine we're just mowing the lawn of the ocean collecting data. Okay? And it's what we call nested data. This data is nested because we have different resolutions. We have data that goes down to 50 meters, sub-meter vertical resolution. We have data that goes down to 5 kilometers with like 25 to 50 meters resolution. So you want to be able to characterize your fault and understand its timing and its structure. And this nested approach gave us an unprecedented scale to describe these faults. This is the ship, our New Horizon. This is an aerial shot while we were out surveying. You can notice all these cables that are being towed off the stern. So the stern of the ship, the bow, this is the seismic source, makes the energy. And these are the ears. Each one of these has 8 hydrophones. They're 50 meters long. They have compass headings at the front. We have GPS buoys here than here. We have parabanes that actually hold the array open. This was the first P-cable survey ever performed on an academic ship, okay? Our ship. So we used the Ravel, we used the Sprawl, the New Horizon, and we also used University of Washington's Tommy Thompson. So this gives us an ability to image the Earth at unprecedented scales in 3 dimensions. Okay. All right, so I'm going to jump to the chase. What are the observations that we see offshore based on all of these data? One, and these are pretty technical, I'm going to show them to you in a more conceptual diagram in a minute. The onlapping sequence revealed that the deformation becomes younger towards the east. Okay. The transport of the Monterey blocks, your favorite Monterey blocks with all that oil and gas. They're being transported to the south, not to the west. Localized regions of compression and extension occur. So we go from areas that are being popped up to areas that are subsiding. Okay? And the basin depth increases above the Catalina basement to the south. So this surface that's supposedly a detachment actually has relief and gets deeper to the south. All of these observations are not consistent with the predictions of the oceanside blind thrust. And in science, we can never prove something's right. We can only prove that the predictions of a hypothesis are not observed. And therefore, you either have to change your hypothesis or reject it. Okay? The data and the observations are consistent with segmented faults, with blue areas going down and red areas going up, like Mount Soledad. It's one of these areas that are popping up. The Rose Canyon Fault does a left jog. It's running right along the 5, jogs out by the beach and tennis club, and then goes north. So you pop up Mount Soledad. And that's why all the kelp forests around Mount Soledad, because you're exposing Cretaceous hard grounds, and the kelp can get a foothold. So the observations are consistent with this, and I'm going to show you some of them. So here, I'm going to show you some seismic data to show you the geometry and style of what we see offshore. This red line going from northwest to southeast is what I'm going to be showing. These are all the deep lines that we used in this part of the study. So here in seismic reflection data, the sound is emitted, and the energy is reflected off of layers due to their difference in density and velocity. And so we make an image like this where we can see the layers, we can see fault offsets, and we can try to understand the history of the Earth. These layers are the tree rings of the Earth. They record Earth history. So, you look at this and you go, okay, that's pretty tough. But But what I want you to notice is here on top is the uninterpreted. The scale here, this is a kilometer in the vertical, that's 1.5 in the horizontal. And what I hope you can all see is this surface that's dipping. That's this blue surface here, and you can see the layers above it are deformed, okay? So let's look and blow up of this. So I'm showing you the uninterpreted and interpreted so you can make your own decisions. Here, I'm just showing you the interpreted so you can see more of the data at a higher resolution. And you can see these beds, the dip of the beds increases up section. This whole block is sliding, but it's not sliding to the west, it's sliding to the south, okay? 90 degrees opposite of what's predicted by the oceanside blind thrust, okay? So here, let's look at what the oceanside blind thrust says. This is the model, here's the thrust. I make geometry on the seafloor by layers peeling off of the thrust, these small secondary thrust faults. And here, they're shown here as these fold scarps and extensional structure. There's my snow plow. I'm plowing this block to the west. Okay? This snow out here doesn't know the snow plow is going to get there. So my deformation should get younger in the direction of the snow plow. It's not what we see. We see the deformation get younger towards the snow plow. Okay? So here, this is our reprocessed new data. This is the old data. And you can see that where they drew these lines up through the seafloor, there's continuous layers. You can't do it. You can't get these faults. This is from the exact same area. You can see the layers here dipping, layers there dipping. This is old data that was collected in the 80s. This is reprocessed data with supercomputers using algorithms that we use today. You can't get these boundaries, these faults, to go up to the surface. Okay? There's no observations that are consistent with the oceanside blind thrust. So here, we reject the hypothesis. All right? So that does lower some of our hazard, but we still have a very significant fault system offshore that's capable of supporting a 7.4 earthquake. Other people have estimated 7 plus, 7.1, 7s. Okay? We're right in the middle of that realm, and I'll show you why we say that. So here, it reduces the hazard here. It reduces the potential of a near-field tsunami because these styles of fault create vertical relief. And we won't get this potential hanging wall effect that increases ground motion. Okay? So onshore terraces also support, and were also published as a companion paper to ours, that if this fault exists, it hasn't moved in the last 3 to 4 million years. So their data says it hasn't moved in a long time. Our data show that the predictions made by the model are not observed. Okay. Rose Canyon. I'm going to have to speed this up. Okay, so Rose Canyon, the star here shows where the 1933 6.4 earthquake occurred. It had no surface rupture. Small earthquakes don't always have, rupture at the surface. When you get up to about a 6.5 to 7, they usually do. So here, this is the Newport-Inglewood. It's segmented. These are the segment boundaries. I'm going to go into those in more detail. The Rose Canyon down here, the last rupture was 1650. This is from Tom Rockwell's work, plus or minus about 120 years. As I mentioned before, Grant's work, Freeman's work up north, I have 0.5 millimeters of slip per year. As I move to the south, I have 2 millimeters per slip. The important thing is the step overs, shown in these yellow boxes, are all 2 kilometers or less. And if you look at Wisnowski's papers and models based on empirical data, if my step over is less than 3 kilometers, then through-going rupture is not inhibited. So all of these fault segments offshore can rupture in concert. and that would yield a 7.3. When we step onshore, again, the segment boundary is not large enough to arrest rupture, and we could get up to a 7.4 earthquake. Okay, so here, these are the data that went in to constrain this, as well as the 3D data, as well as chirp data that we collected across the Christianitas Fault and other faults near shore. So here, this is what it looks like in cross-section. I'm gonna go through this kind of quickly, but this is a complicated picture, but it shows a neat thing. So imagine you're right between these two red lines where that arrow is, and you're looking at these two seismic lines, and you can notice that this is where they intersect. So you're looking right at the intersection. Can everybody see this big doming feature? This is what we call an antiform. This is recording. So here, the Torrey Pines segment is in yellow. The La Jolla segment is in red. It jumps offshore, so it's a right lateral fault with a left jog. We learned that that causes compression, and we can see the bath mat folded up into this mound. Okay? This is the La Jolla Canyon. You can see it in the bathymetry going back onshore. Okay? So we can look at this in high resolution. This is the chirp data, the system we built. This is now 15 meters. I was showing you 5 kilometers of penetration. You can actually see the Newport-Inglewood Rose Canyon fault on the seafloor. You can see how the layers are folded and faulted. So the deformation that I can see in this image augments and helps me understand better the fault completely, its depth of structure and its surface expression. Moving north, I'm now going on the Torrey Pine segment, and I'm jumping over to the Carlsbad segment. So here we can see deformation and folding. This is upturned, this is downturned. The fault isn't as active here in the northern part of the Carlsbad segment. Jumping farther north, I see another aniform. The reason I see this is my Carlsbad segment, as in before, is in green, and it steps over to my Camp Pendleton step over. The red shows the seafloor. We're looking at 3 different seismic lines. North is oriented that way. Again, I have a left jog on a right lateral fault. I see compression and folding. Okay. So here, when I move farther north in the northern segment, I have 2 branches. I have the Dana Point segment and I have the Camp Pendleton segment. So here, based on numerous lines, of which I've shown you a few, we've divided this fault system into 4 segments separated by 3 stepovers. Going from north to south here, I'm looking here at the San Onofre stepover, Carlsbad stepover, Torrey Pine stepover. None of them are 2 kilometers or larger. So if a fault happens here, there's nothing to arrest its propagation all the way north. Okay? So what we did was we took these strands of these faults and we made rupture scenarios. And what I want you to focus on is this is the rupture scenario for all 4 strands, offshore rupturing. 125 kilometer length. Based on Wells-Coppersmith empirical relationships that we can see here. These are for strike slip, reverse, and normal faults. What I see is there's an empirical relationship between rupture length and magnitude. Magnitude is shown here on the left. Rupture length is shown in log scale. When I have a 125 kilometer offset, I generate a 7.3. I can also calculate this from first principles. So here, this uses slip. We have minor slip of 0.5 to 2 meters slip, and this is constrained by trenches that we've looked at. We have here the shear modulus, which is 20 gigapascals versus 45 gigapascals. This is the range that we can see from looking at P to S wave comparisons, pressure waves versus shear waves, derived from the SCEC, Southern California earthquake model. Okay, so we also then have low slip, high slip. So here you'll notice that the numbers for both the theoretical and the empirical yield consistent numbers. So here, just to go through this, a physical meaningful link is between the rupture, the shear modulus, the displacement, and the magnitude. And this is the seismic moment. So the seismic moment here, we have here shear modulus that we range from 20 to 45. This is average displacement, which is 0.5 to 2. The area of rupture is then calculated by this is the seismogenic thickness based on microseismicity. And so the microseismicity shows the seismogenic zone here is 10 to 15 kilometers deep. So we picked a number in between of 13 kilometers. And then you can calculate the seismic moment. The seismic moment is directly related to magnitude by this equation. Okay, so, and they're yielding similar numbers, both empirical and theoretically derived, physically derived. So here, when we rupture all of the offshore strands and the onshore strands, so this model right here, where they're all green, we can get up to a magnitude 7.4. So here, all right, summary of these 4 fault strands. The main thing is we've characterized them very carefully. The stepovers would not inhibit through-going rupture. 7.3, 7.4 would be a very significant event. And the onshore and offshore data that we've examined doesn't suggest that all of these have ruptured together in the past. And I can go through that in the question and answer. So here we are. There's the 5 biggest earthquakes in California. Would be right up in the top. This would be a significant event. We don't have to inflate the hazard here. This would be significant. Okay? This is a hazard. We need to be prepared. Okay? Tsunami hazards. So here we are. We're sitting in here. This is San Clemente, Catalina. We're sitting right on shore here. The pink map is where sea level. You'll notice here in the Salton Trough that areas are below sea level. That's because they've been extended. But what I'd like to draw your attention to is this area off of Southern California called the California borderlands. It's about 250 kilometers wide. To the north of Point Conception, the margin is much narrower. And to the south in Baja, this region here of shoals and deeps acts as a natural baffle to far-field tsunamis. Okay? So here, as the tsunamis approach Southern California through the borderlands, the waves build up, and then they collapse, build up, and then they collapse. So far-field tsunamis, we have a pretty good situation here that they'll be knocked down. They'll still exist, but they'll be knocked down. Remember I told you about these subduction margins. Largest earthquakes, largest tsunamis. This is where the plate is subducted back into the earth, and we get slow distortion of the overriding plate, the hanging wall. When the earthquake happens, this relaxes, and we create a big bulge of water. This bulge of water then propagates at tsunami wave speeds of hundreds of miles an hour, 400 to 500 miles an hour, until it gets into shallow water. And then it slows down to like California driving speed of about 75 to 80 miles an hour. Right? If you're not doing 80 on the highway, you're a goner here. Right? So this is the style of margin that creates the largest earthquakes and the largest tsunamis, not strike-slip. Well, let's look at evidence for near-field tsunamis. So near-field tsunamis can be caused by fault offset or submarine landslides. Okay? And if these submarine landslides are fast, then they can displace the water and they can cause a tsunami. Okay, well, what do these look like? Well, this is off of Santa Barbara, and here we have the Goleta slide. Keep trying to do that. Goleta slide here. An invention that would be really cool is somebody who comes up with a pointer that works on a TV screen. Okay, your guys told me they bought like 3 green ones thinking they had it solved. I brought a green one tonight, and you go, eh. All right, so here you can see the Goleta slide out. That blocks slide out. I have a scar here. Gaviota didn't go very far. I've got seismic sections if you want to see it afterwards, but this didn't go very far from the source. So it probably wasn't tsunamigenic. So what do we look for tsunamigenic failures? We look for things like this. This is in McKinney Bay in Lake Tahoe. These blocks are on the size of a kilometer, and they failed out of McKinney Bay and went rumbling down the steep slope, probably engendering a tsunami. Our work shows that this happened about 60,000 years ago. These are these blocks in the middle of Lake Tahoe. Okay, Lake Tahoe is about 500 meters and change. One of my students, I asked him, I said, how deep is Lake Tahoe? And he goes, I know it's deeper than 5 meters. What do you say? You go, yeah? Yeah, okay, let's build on that. All right, so here, look at these blocks. This is 50 kilometers. This is Oahu. Okay, the Nuuanu landslide collapsed out of this volcanic edifice, and these blocks are on the order of 20 to 25 kilometers across, skittering down the slope, displacing water. This is what you'd look for past evidence of scars and blocks and tsunamis. This is the largest underwater slide we know of on planet Earth. It's called the Stoyager slide, and it's off Norway. 5,000 cubic kilometers of material failed in this slide. Okay, 2,000 times larger than the 1980 Mount St. Helens. Okay, this is a big event. And this triggered tsunamis up to 15 to 20 meters in some places in Britain. And I can show you some of the data and where the tsunamis were largest. This is the largest slide we know of in the oceans. And then we come back. Here we are, Southern California. We see the Carlsbad, Oceanside, Newport, San Gabriel canyons. We don't see these large blocks. We see Crespi Knoll here, created by compression of faulting. We can actually see the fault run right through this knoll here and offset it. We can see up at Washwin Knoll, again, created by faulting. But we don't see signs of huge scars and blocks that would be attributable to creating a large tsunami that's near field. Does that mean it's not going to happen? No. But we don't have evidence for it happening in the recent past, geologically. So here, the borderlands baffle and diminish the energy of far-field tsunamis. We're still susceptible to near-field tsunamis. You'll have very little time. You'll have minutes. If you see the water moving out and the surfers standing on their surfboards on the sand, it's time to go. Okay? All right? The largest historical tsunami wave height, as I told you before, was 4.5 meters. In 1868, the largest tsunami in Southern California, south of Point Conception, is the 1812 earthquake and was 3.4 meters. Okay, so here, I'm going to talk about fires for just a second. This here is the Paradise Fire, which is here, which was part of the 2003 wildfires. This fire was consuming almost 4,000 acres per hour. It jumped to 15, okay, down by Miramar. Okay, it almost burnt to the ocean. You can see here. Okay, so what we've done is we've looked at fire as another hazard. This is a hazard. Tsunamis occur infrequently, but they're a real finite threat. Earthquakes might happen a little more frequently here, but there's long time periods, open periods between earthquakes. Fires have become every day. And in October, for 1 or 2 weeks, with 100-degree temperatures, zero humidity in Santa Ana, we're ripe for a firestorm. And I was just up in Northern California. We're getting ready to put up cameras up there. The Tubbs fire was jumping kilometers at a time. 1,000 homes just destroyed. Nothing but chimneys. 1,000 homes. Okay, so, and about 8,000 structures were destroyed in that fire up north. Here's our lovely city of San Diego. This is the Witch Fire in '07. The Witch Fire combined with other fires, but burnt almost 240,000 acres. So what are we going to do about fire? We live, a lot of us, in this urban-rural interface. fires are going to come screaming down from the mountains. And when there's Santa Ana, there's not much you can do if you don't get on them quick. So our group, collaborating with SDG&E and University of Reno, the seismological group, we've built a fire camera network that's also can be used for early seismic warning. The cameras are shown here in these arrows. Okay, you're looking at the Lions Canyon camera, and it's pointing to the east. The light purple shows the shade of the camera. What you can notice here is El Capitan Reservoir in the background. We can actually, the firefighters here, use these cameras to look for fires. This is a blow up. These are 4K definition cameras, pan, tilt, zoom, and they have infrared. So we can look at temperature at night. Okay. You can also go on them and right click, and you can look at time lapse, so we can look at the history of the fire. We can put that into fire models. Okay. We can detect fires early. We can provide situational awareness. So here we are at San Clemente, and we've got our eyes on you. Okay. Right here. All right. So we can see out to the ocean. All right, we're building up north. We're going to be running this ridge line with our next set of cameras, and then we're going to be jumping over across into San Gabriel, San Bernardino regions. You can go on here. This website is alertwildfire.org. It's available to everybody. We have cameras at Tahoe. We have them in Nevada. We have them in San Ynez. We have them through San Diego County, and we're going to have them in Orange County. So here, you can select on any of these cameras, and you can look at them, and you can pan through and look for danger. Okay, so here's a blow up of your area. This is a fire today. Okay, so this is up in Palomar region. This was a controlled burn. So we got right on it with CAL FIRE and the Monte Vista Dispatch, and they told us it was a controlled burn. But we detect these things right away. We can triangulate. So when you get on this website, if you just click this icon at the top, it shows you the angle of all the cameras. You can triangulate, and you can position the cameras to tell people where the fires are. So I'm going to just go through one of these. I have several. This is from the San Diego Fire Rescue Chief, Brian Fennessy. This was greatly improved situational awareness, our coordination with CAL FIRE, and allow for quicker response times, better response strategies, faster evacuation orders to ensure our communities are better prepared in the face of a wildfire. It is my goal to make sure what happened up north never happens again. Here's other with the Whittier fire. It allowed them to see where hotshot crews were working, where air tanker drops were helping. Okay, so here, again, this is the Monte Vista Control Center Battalion Chief. The Whittier fire, okay, Monte Vista. I can't explain how valuable these cameras are. Over and over again, I could just show you numerous times. We just had a press release where you can go on and look at it. This is the wall fire. Look at that cyclone in front of the fire. So these cameras are allowing us to look at fire dynamics and go into models. On the supercomputer, we're trying to model where burn areas are, incorporate weather and fuel. These things make their own weather. These are horrific. We almost burnt down at my house in 2003 and 2007. Okay? So, you guys, we live in hazard country. You guys have a great website, earthquakes. Hopefully you all have shoes under your bed. Most people cut their feet on glass during an earthquake. I have cash in this box, but my two sons have found it. So it's a revolving door. I keep looking, and it's gone. Where'd the money go? Pizza. All right, so have cash. Never let your car be below half a tank. Okay? I have a generator. Everybody asks me, do you have earthquake insurance? No. Okay? I do not. But I have a house that's firmly attached to the foundation. If you own an older house, you can get money from the state to help you better anchor the house to the foundation. There's lots of websites you can go to find out about earthquake country. This is sponsored by SCEC. This is the Great Shakeout. Okay, we all worry about what to do before. After is just as important. You need to have a plan for after, what you're going to do to improve the safety after the earthquakes. Okay, and remember, don't run outside. I've already looked. I would beat him under this table if we started shaking. All right, and the best thing to use, if you have it near you, is your laptop. Put your laptop over your head, okay, and get under something. I checked this out when I first got here. I said, that's a good spot, okay, all right? So, and then you got to reconnect and restore, all right? Tsunamis. If you're in low-lying areas, you feel an earthquake, or you see the water go out, or you hear the sirens, head for higher ground and do it quickly, safely, okay? Houses, certain protections you can do, but if you're right on the water, a lot of them, riprap and things like that, can't be done anymore. Wildland fire, okay? This is a big hazard for all of Southern California, all of the West. It's 365 now. These wildfires come fast and furious. There's the third week of October seems to be just the death nail. It's usually, it was 107 degrees in my house, zero humidity, and Santa Ana's blowing 20 to 30 miles an hour. Just prime conditions for a firestorm. And you can make a wildlife plan and prepare your home. And with that, I'm going to show you where we almost lost our camera in the Whittier fire, and I'm willing to take questions. Thanks for your time.
Okay, folks, if you have questions, cards, come up and give them to me here. I'll just go through them in the order I receive them. If there's a question that is more appropriate for, thank you very much. I'll do that right there. I'll do my thank you. And if there's a question more appropriate for the CEP, I'll recognize that. We'll get that submitted and ensure that it gets answered either way, either tonight or at the next community engagement panel. That is a really haunting camera shot. I'm going to throw that out there.
Infrared, and you're going to watch as we take questions. It's burnt right up to our camera.
Oh, that's time lapse to go through. Okay.
Lapse, yeah.
So, Dr. Driscoll, when will California have a warning system?
So right now, the USGS is working on a warning system. They've been trying to get this warning system out. We just had a meeting with the USGS about collaboration because we've built this network that's microwave technology. It's licensed to us.
Oh, can you hold the mic, the microphone, Dr. Driscoll?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So here, we don't use cell phone technology because cell phones are going to go down in an emergency. We've seen that over and over again. We have a microwave backbone where we have licensed frequencies that will be transmitted. You'll have receivers on the wall of your house, and one noise will be a seismic event. Another alarm will be fire, and we'll have command centers. All of the battalions have access to the microwave technology and signal. So we're building out a different strategy, and we're collaborating with the USGS. But your question about when California is going to have an early warning system statewide is better addressed by the people at the USGS. We're building our own network, and it will provide early warning we'll have moisture sensors for atmospheric rivers and flooding, landslides. We'll have some strong seismometers, and we'll have fire cameras. So our system building out will be coming to Orange County soon, and we'll have that capability here in much of Southern California. We have the ANSA-Borrego network. So we already have a lot of this infrastructure in place, but we've concentrated here at University of California, San Diego, in our area first, but we're making forays up into Northern California.
Okay. You could use Amazon Alexa. I'm pretty sure we'd all get the message through that, the nice dulcet tones. Can you clarify the Christianitos fault? And then can a 8.2 earthquake be supported on Newport-Inglewood?
So let me answer the last one first. and then I'll skip to a few slides to talk about the Christianitas Fault. So, 7.8, 1906 San Francisco earthquake, up to 480 kilometers of surface rupture. So, some people have proposed an 8.2, seen an 8.1. This would be the largest earthquake in the history of California. And the rupture length that's permitted by this fault in the segments we've mapped is about 150 kilometers. So based on our data with detailed mapping and characterization of the faults, we're giving you the estimates both on empirical data and theoretical, and they're consistent, and they're on the order of 7.3, 7.4. Other estimates by Jim Dolan up at USC come in around 7+. Kuhn's paper, also 7+, but this would have to rupture new ground and have it be about twice as long, almost 3 times as long as the present fault rupture scenario. So in my expert opinion, this fault cannot support that large earthquake. I think what happened was the USGS released that the San Andreas could support an 8.1 earthquake, and I think people confuse maybe that forecast and estimate for the faults here in the Palos Verdes, Newport-Inglewood. So here, if I just scroll down for a few slides. So here's the Christianitas Fault. The Christianitas Fault is not in the USERF 3 model, the Universal California Earthquake Rupture Model, and it's not in the California Geological Survey model because it's inactive. So we mapped the Christianitas Fault, published on this in 2015. We collected all of these lines. Here's the Christianitas Fault coming offshore. In the cliffs, the colors here show what's in the cliffs. The Monterey is separated by the fault to the San Mateo, so it's younger to the northwest. So it's got a down to the northwest component. And when we look at this in seismic data, we can see that the Christianitas Fault is folded and faulted. We propose that it has a strike-slip component, which wasn't previously recognized. And you can see the layers over here on-lap or pinch out against this, suggesting that this was here prior to these deposits, because the deposits feel them. So we can look here in the cliffs. You were talking earlier to me, sir, about these synthetic faults, and if you walk farther, they're antithetic here in the cliffs. So this is the San Mateo. This here is the Bay Point abrasive platform conglomerate, and then you have the alluvium on top. And when you look at this fault, here it is. This is a black and white photograph out of a field trip guide. Here's the fault. Here's the Monterey, San Mateo. Cobble lag is not offset. The cobble lag is estimated to be, by some, 125,000 years ago. My group thinks it could be as young as 80, but there's onshore trenching that says it might not have moved for the last 500,000 years. Here's my students pointing at the fault. It's a beautiful field trip right there off of Path 1. This is the Monterey, San Mateo blocky sandstone. There's the cobble lag, and if you look here, here's a cartoon. It's not offset, so the fault's not active. And here, when you look at active faults in California, 10 to 11,000 years is the break. This fault hasn't moved, in my opinion, for at least 80,000 years. Some believe even 125 to 500,000 years. That's why it's not in these models, because it's not active.
Okay. There was a question, Ms. Crummer, if you wouldn't mind providing your email address, I'll make sure the CP answers. You asked a question about the state park renewal and how do you know if there's going to be an accident, a question that should be answered, and I'd like to. So if you could potentially leave that, Dr. Driscoll won't be able to speak to that item or that subject matter here, but I certainly would like to get it answered. Okay. Start with probably the most germane one. Can you give us a practical explanation for how much the ground would move in a 7.4 magnitude earthquake? How far up and down? how far side to side, and for how long?
So in that movie, the displacement I showed you, you could have displacement for minutes after the earthquake started. Okay, and the scale on that was about a meter displacement. So here, converting magnitude, which is what we calculate when we look at fault structures and linkages and empirical data, versus ground motion, requires a few extra steps. One, you have to know how far you are from the epicenter. So I showed you that movie. That movie showed where the fault was rupturing and how far on either side that rupture is ground motion that's significant. Okay? It also depends on the competency of the rock between where you are and the epicenter. Because if you have very competent rock, it transmits the wave more efficiently with less attenuation. If you have incompetent rock, then it attenuates much quicker. So here, it depends where you are. It depends on directionality. But for a 7.7 magnitude earthquake, the displacements were on the order of a meter plus, and they were out to on the order of about 20 kilometers, 15, 20 kilometers, but dying away. So I showed you that movie to give you some appreciation of why certain faults are a bigger hazard for us here than faults that actually could rupture larger, that are farther away.
And so to transmit that into like what we would experience here at a heavy.
You wouldn't be able to make it to the door without looking like you'd had a rough night in the bar. Okay, walking would be difficult. The P wave would hit us like a cannon, and the P wave is the pressure wave that comes first. That's what we use in early detection. And then the shear wave comes, and the shear wave has motion that's orthogonal to the direction it propagates. And that's the big shaker, and that's the one that, so here, right now, if we ripped a 7.4, I would take every bit of my focus to successfully navigate under that table. Okay, so it's quite, and if you talk to anybody who's survived an earthquake of that magnitude, it's difficult to walk. Okay.
And would that? I'm just asking for more clarifying questions so we can make sure, Gary, that you get the direction you need. So would that move furniture? Would that have a shaking?
Well,
type
not
of
these.
Thing?
These guys, I think, are bolted down.
Those would be okay, but it would move furniture.
Yes. TVs, are these TVs anchored well to the wall?
I don't know. Yeah, I would assume so. I hope so. I'm underneath one. So it would definitely. Like water heaters, bookcases.
You want to have everything in my house, like the water heaters, the bookcases. I have a bungee cord that goes around my rack with all my shovels and rakes and things like that. So I look around my house and I say, what can accelerate, and that's not latched to the foundation or to a wall. So you really want to go through your house room by room, and also take pictures. Take pictures of your material, okay, your property. So this is going to be a significant event.
Okay.
Please do not underestimate a 7.4.
And how long would that last for?
It could. The 7.7 I showed there, the shaking lasted for almost 3 minutes.
Okay.
And if you're in LA Basin, it could last longer.
So we don't. Sorry, this is Tim Brown question. I'll fill out a card later.
Right.
So in Orange County, we're not susceptible to that same type of acceleration or that same magnitude of. It looked like it was almost amplified.
Yeah, at a 7.4 it would be a lot of displacement.
Okay.
So
similar.
That magnitude is about 12 to 10 times more energy than a 7.4. But here, a 7.7, that's the big one. That's right up near the top of what we've had historically here in California.
Why wasn't ground acceleration this is a Song's question. Why wasn't ground acceleration part of the study? Isn't that the point of the research? So I think that's more Song specific.
I think that's more Songs. What we were, our charge was to characterize the fault segments and their architecture. So it requires another study to actually convert that into ground motion, given the attenuation of rock type and distance from the epicenter. Okay.
And then Gary asked a question about how much notice will Edison secure to get the business of lifting and lowering radioactive materials when it's being transported. I'll get you an answer to that question. Dr. Driscoll isn't the person to answer that one, but I'll make sure the CEP addresses that. Is any portion of the Christianitos Fault active? I think you answered that previously, which was no.
We've mapped it both in 2D and 3D, and the onshore data that's been dated by uranium thorium of corals on these terraces show that it hasn't moved since at least last 80,000 years. And when you get offshore, we have 3D data and 2D data across this fault. When it dies away as it merges into the Rose Canyon, Newport-Inglewood. And so there's no evidence for offshore modern deformation.
If so, can there be onshore surface ruptures from the Christianitos Fault? Is a follow-up question on that?
Yeah, it's not an active fault.
Okay. All right, so this is a songs question regarding the nuclear waste being buried at the beach, whether or not that is safe. I'll provide that to the CEP, probably not something Dr. Driscoll to answer on that one. Thank you.
Mayor Brown,
Yes. If you'd like, is it regarding this card?
Yes, as a mother and a concerned citizen and a property owner, Dr. Driscoll, the thing that stood out to me the most with all these predictions, they're helpful and wonderful, but you stated at the very beginning, if the ground's shaking at the beach, get to higher ground and don't go back until officials say it's okay
Correct.
to come back. So my question is, can you please explain how it's safe and prudent to bury this nuclear waste feet from the beach? That's a concern.
So my expertise, I'm a geophysicist, and that question needs to be addressed to the CEP.
Yeah, that's the most appropriate location for it. His expertise is in earthquakes, and that's what the discussion is tonight. I'll make sure it's directed to CEP.
It's an important
answer.
question. I'm not, but that's not my expertise. Okay.
So we're going to ask an MBA. I mean,
Okay, could I finish the questions and then we'll get to the rest of it? Well, I'm sorry, but this is really specific to the earthquakes tonight. You're asking a songs specific question. Is that correct? You want to know why the waste is being? Okay.
It is related to the earthquakes. It's directly
Okay.
related to what Dr. Driscoll was addressing with us tonight.
Okay.
How still
Is it to put a canister of nuclear?
Again, to respect Dr. Driscoll's
So
time.
here, let me try to give you some, and the smarty pants MBA answer is there's engineers and there's design basis and there's many experts that have looked into that, and that's not my expertise, so I can't answer that from a level of understanding and knowledge about that. So that's why you have to talk to the engineers.
Educated guess?
No. Educated guesses, you know what happens when you assume.
Okay, so there's other questions regarding the EIR for the nuclear waste plan. Is the current nuclear waste storage plan still due to begin mid-December? I'll have the CEP answer that. Somebody asked your professional opinion regarding to store nuclear waste at the beach of San Onofre. Obviously, another germane topic, but something that will be also relevant for the CEP. Here is a question. If San Andreas ruptures, what is your opinion that it causes the other faults, Whittier, Newport, Inglewood, Christianitos, Garlock, to rupture as well? Is there a megaquake scenario?
There was recently a paper by Peter Shear's student that proposed that, think about it like many springs, that if we had rupture on one of the large faults, that we could have triggered rupture on some of the others. And we do see evidence for this in the Salton Sea, where the Elmore Ranch fault triggered and had faults afterwards. So there is evidence of fault clustering and triggering. Our group published a paper in Nature that showed that cross faults in the Salton Sea could trigger the southern San Andreas when loaded with water. In the old days, before we manipulated the Colorado River, the river could flow north into the Salton Trough, and it would fill it up about 80 meters. So the Salton Trough is about 70 meters below sea level, and the delta is the dam, and that's 13 meters above sea level. So we showed that bending forces on these faults could load the San Andreas by Coulomb stress increases and trigger the San Andreas. And then we said, wow, isn't it interesting that the San Andreas, the open period is about 175 years longer, or 100 years longer than the 175-year period. And maybe this is due to manipulation of the water and not loading these faults. So yes, there are papers and studies that suggest that triggering, so faulting on one large fault could trigger rupture on others. And it was published last year, and it's by Peter Shearer's student.
Does that incorporate, you had said 8.0 was about the top end of the scale. Does that, just a follow-up question, does that include that triggering event and what could happen if you get some, I guess, some...
Right, so you'd get, let's say you had, I'd rather stay in the historical record, so let's say you had like a 7.8, 7.9 on the San Andreas, and that triggered a 7.7 on the San Jacinto, and about a 7.0, 7.2 on the Elsinore. So as these others trigger, the magnitude is dictated by the rupture and displacement and the shear modulus. So it's not like cumulative.
Doesn't create, okay,
Yeah.
I see. Does the P wave come to us as sound? The Whittier quake sounded like a train that when it hit.
Yeah, the P wave, and it's moving through the rock at high speeds. It usually sounds like a gun rapport. It can sound like a train. So here, there is sound associated with the P wave and with the S wave, but the P wave, because it's compressional, it's moving in the direction of propagation, it's moving faster, usually is associated with sound. So that's usually what wakes you up, and then you start shaking.
Okay. What fault was the video?
San Andreas.
Was that showing in the displacement featuring? Was it that was San Andreas?
That was the San Andreas.
Joaquin?
That was rupturing. That was 7.7 rupturing from Bombay Beach up to Lancaster, about 230 kilometers.
Is that considered the most active and most, I guess, in sense along the faults? Is that the one considered to be the most volatile?
The San Andreas has a lot of slip. It has like 22 millimeters per year. So with higher slip, you get higher frequency of earthquakes. So the San Andreas has the more frequency of earthquakes and supports the larger earthquakes. So the USGS released an article in the paper that said that they thought, with looking at new calculations, that it could support like a 8 to 8.1. But that's for a huge rupture. That's for 500 kilometers. So these ruptures would be very long surface ruptures.
Okay. And then final question is, does OCFA, have they worked with you on your fire cameras and the placement and the coordination, the Orange County Fire Authority?
We're right now, we're in reconnaissance, looking at mountaintops. We also can put cameras on private property that have good vistas. So we're in the reconnaissance mode. We haven't yet reached out to get permits. Permits are the toughest part, but we have partners in CAL FIRE, Cal Office of Emergency Services, California Seismic Safety Commission, and these people help us get permits. Permits is the toughest part for getting these stations on top of mountains. So we usually cohabitate mountains that already have structures, like cell phone structures and towers, so we don't ruin pristine mountaintops when we can go next door to a place that already has towers.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Driscoll. We appreciate your time. One
Do we
thing.
have time for another question?
Well,
Just a
you can
follow-up?
submit the blue cards, and that's what the format was, Gary.
I was just follow up on the ground motion at Song.
Okay. What was your question?
As I understood it, the purpose of the whole earthquake study was to update our information about the threat to San Onofre posed by earthquakes. And so Edison had to perform this study specifically in relation to songs. So I'm curious why the ground motion wasn't further studied right at songs, so we know how much actual ground motion there is. And was that a matter of budget that we didn't study that to take it to the extra level?
Okay, well,
That's for the CEP, and if they haven't, keep persisting. I don't know. You need to bring that to the CEP.
So that's just
Gary,
something
I'll ask that.
to work.
Gary, I'll pose that question and send it to Dr. Victor. It's an excellent question. We'll pose that one. Kate, if you wouldn't mind getting that screenshot. For those of you folks who are interested in some of the subject matter, there's a lot of questions here regarding songs. I wanted to make sure that I showed this resource on the songscommunity.com. I asked that they created an index that would show all of the previous meeting subject matter. So for folks that wanted to see Dr. Driscoll's presentation in regard to songs itself, it's under songscommunity.com historical index. And you can see how it has been organized there. There's papers and video regarding the cast question, as well as regarding earthquake presentations. And this is one way that it has been organized so that you can digest and cover. It's been almost 4 years of meetings, and so there's a lot of detail available for anyone that would like it there. I'm going to be taking these questions and submitting them to the folks at Song so that they can provide answers to these and have them online so that they can have that. Dr. Driscoll will also be in Oceanside.
Yes, on Thursday. So if there's something that comes to mind that you'd like to please show up. Thursday it'll be at 6 o'clock at Oceanside.
And that will be at the City Council chambers down there?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Dr. Dress, for coming out tonight, and thank you, folks, for coming out as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.